just, cool. Welcome everyone to another bi-weekly CF on Kubernetes working group forum meeting. We have a document with some topics that you can add to that I will paste in chat. Additionally, if you cannot open the document, you can paste your questions or topics in chat and I will add them to the document. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. So if you would like to add anything, please do so. Otherwise, we will get started with the first topic in just about a minute. All right, let's get rolling. The first topic we have is removing HNC proposal. There's a linked document inside of the working group forum document, but if we would like to do a silent read, we can do that, or we can just talk about it in generalities. I do not know if we have the person that put the topic on the board in the meeting today, but that's fine. It's a bit of a longer document, so I don't know if we want to spend the entire time doing a silent read, but I can leave it up to the group. How do y'all feel?
Maybe just 5 minutes just to give people a chance to read over it a bit.
Cool. All right, let's go ahead and do that. I'll ping y'all in a few minutes then. Thanks, Eric. So hopefully everyone had a little bit of time to skim the document and get an idea of what the issues we're having with HNC are, from not propagating all the resources we need to a little bit of slow reconciliation, especially when the cluster is busy, to the thought that it's an additional fairly heavyweight external dependency. And there's been some work to sort of spike out what it looks like if we can remove it, what we need to manage ourselves. And then there's a couple open questions. So we can just sort of get general thoughts if anyone wants to speak up about that, and then move to the open questions, if that works. And we have Jillian joining us, it looks like, who can speak to any of the other items. But let's get started. Initial reactions. How do people feel about the pros, cons, and concerns?
Yeah, my main concern was with the motivations, I was wondering if these are if we can kind of confute these motivations so that we don't have to do the work, right? So for example, I think today Kieran kind of pointed out that the service accounts thing might not be a problem anymore, although I'm not sure if that's the case, or maybe it's only the case for the newest versions of K8s.
It's in K8s 124. So when you create a service account, it no longer creates a token and a secret for that token. So you have to do that manually. So that solves that HNC bug when they turned off propagating service accounts, because then it would muck up the secrets. So it becomes a manual step now when you create a service account, and you have, if you want anyone to be able to log in as it, you have to go and actually create the secret with the token in it as well.
Right.
And there's a kubectl new command saying create token as well, so you can get tokens without creating service accounts. Sorry, that's totally orthogonal to it. But that's not until 124 though, so not everyone will be using that at the moment.
Yeah, that is true, but also it's not like if it's something that we know is going away soon, we might not bother until then, right? Same with the ready status thing. I was wondering, is it something that we can even do, given it's kind of supposed to be a continuous reconciling process? When do we call it done? I'm not entirely sure it's something that we can even do.
Well, I think in the case of the custom, in the case of our bespoke code, is very straightforward, right? There's a very limited set of things we have to propagate. It all happens like near synchronously in our reconciler. So by the time we're done reconciling, we know that this thing is consumable. So like that isn't a guarantee that it's going to always be consumable in the future, but it's a pretty good guarantee that the user who created the org or space or whatever can actually use it, right? So it's like good enough. It's kind of at the level where everything else that's reconciled is also at. So
Sounds like that works well for space and org creation, but what about role binding propagation? So if you create a role binding for a new user in the root namespace, say, does that mean, oh no, I don't know what, it's one of those
we
things
don't
that,
have any reflection of that in ready state, right? Like
we have it when you create a
could.
new user and you expect them to be able to see a space, but their role hasn't propagated there yet. Say that's when you add a role binding to an org. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a case.
That's a new requirement that we currently have no support for, right? So yeah, it's true that it doesn't solve all of the problems, but
well, we've got
I
the
guess
org
for
user
me,
role
like,
binding in an org, haven't we? Does that get propagated? Maybe not. So
I think you could, it's the problem's still simpler even for that case though, because like you could like not necessarily track all the role bindings you've propagated on the resource, but you could like tweak it, say last updated at, and have our shim or whatever wait for that to change. Like I think it does give us a lot more control even for things like that.
I mean, presumably for users that are added to the platform after an org or space is created, the controller is going to have to watch role binding resources so that it can propagate things correctly.
Yeah, I think in general, the kind of the last point in that list of motivations is the most salient for me, which is like we've kind of made this position that installing HNC is our customer's problem, right? And it's a prerequisite. But then we've turned around and looked at all these different ways we could figure it, right? And we don't actually test HNC like in the blind, right? We test it. We test the configuration that we've imported, which means that we're sort of taking on this onus of maintaining HNC, you know, making sure that we're updated on patches and things like that. We have the right image references, and we're in this ugly gray zone right now. And I think most of these solutions and mitigations are things that would make that worse. Instead of what I believe is a relatively small amount of code just to do it ourselves.
Yeah,
from my point of view, this document doesn't cover an important scenario, is that you have a Cloud Foundry deployment on Kubernetes. And for example, a new colleague joins your organization and you give him permissions for a space, for example. How do you do it? Is it going, who is going to propagate the role binding? My point is that in order to do this, you're going to run CF create role, whatever, to that user. This would effectively create a role binding somewhere.
Yeah.
Who is going to take care about propagating that role binding to nested spaces?
So I think that's covered in the what is it, 3.2 in the proposal. We have to watch role bindings for the ones that we need to propagate, which currently are very few. I think the only ones that actually do anything right now, I mean, the only one that actually is significant that needs to be propagated is the CF admin role. So that's the one that we have to watch bindings for, and that we just do in the CF namespace. Now, the complete permissions model has us propagating some other roles at the org level, which means we would have to watch the org namespaces. But, you know, again, that's not actually, that's not like a huge stretch, right? That's just us watching a few different object types in a limited set of namespaces. It should be smaller than what HNC does.
But still, this is not going to solve the problem with the asynchronous nature of Kubernetes.
I'm not sure one would.
True.
Yeah, I think it doesn't completely solve it, but we do have more control to add mitigations there. But like I still want to go back to something Julian said earlier, where it's like for our end users, installing HNC is like a big, it basically says this cluster should be used for CF and CF only. If you have other namespace like management systems or anything else, like don't use it. Versus if we had our own like lighter weight thing, it would like shrink our footprint quite a bit and like widen the range of like clusters and like configurations people could like actually support, so they could install it alongside other things easier.
Playing the devil's advocate, would it be a sensible approach to evaluate whether changing HNC to limit the scope it watches, for example, configure it to watch only certain namespaces or certain objects by label, whatever, wouldn't that be cheaper?
I honestly don't think
That's what I was
so.
about to say. Like, I think it should be configurable to like limited scope so that it's not invasive for the whole cluster. Like both the webhook and the, I guess, the controller can be told, please don't bother about everything outside this, for example.
So, I guess for starters, my sense, given the 2 days of spike work we did to run without HNC, is that it isn't actually going to be that much cheaper. And then I think going back to what I said earlier, that increases our footprint of HNC like mutations that we then do against an HNC configuration that we've got in our dependencies, not HNC in the wild, right? So we don't, it's going to reduce our confidence that somebody can bring their own HNC to this picture. So we have to maintain it, which is an ongoing cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we only run with HNC configured in a certain way, though. Like of course we can't just support any cluster that has HNC running on it. Like we need a certain configuration. So like, if you want to bring your own HNC, but this is the config. Like, I think that's fair to ask. Of course, like what happens if you have a cluster which already uses HNC and is configured differently in a way that it's incompatible with us, then what do? I guess you can't have two. So that's a problem, right? If you already have HNC for you because you want to use it for your own stuff and it's configured in a different way, you can't tell it, oh no, now listen, only these spaces, because they need to use it for something else in a different way. And that gets in the way. That could be a problem, I guess.
And right, and even like a lot of these like levers we have to limit what it looks at, those are actually applying to its process itself. So the K8s API is still like, even if you tell it only look at these like certain namespaces that match a regex, the K8s API is still having to like send every namespace request to it, and then the like HNC process itself decides whether or not to use it.
I think like that one's not going to be solved though, is it? Because we need to be dynamic. That if you add new spaces and orgs, you still have to be able to listen in them to propagate things.
We have to listen in them, but we don't necessarily have to gatekeep their creation and deletion and stuff to the extent that HNC does. So like
it does it on labels anyway, by setting labels based on the regex, and then so stuff shouldn't get to the reconcilers. I suppose you can apply the same technique in this as well.
Well, I mean,
it's not the reconcilers I'm talking about. I'm talking about the webhooks themselves. So like, if your HNC goes down, then you're not able to delete like unrelated namespaces from what I've observed, which I feel like is pretty problematic for a cluster that might be hosting other things.
Is that? And that's even with the restriction turned on and with the webhooks. Maybe that's something we set reasonably recently. the restricting it to the CF star stuff. So only those would be labeled.
That restriction, my understanding of that is it actually is a flag, an arg for the manager process that tells it what to reconcile, but it doesn't affect the webhooks.
Oh God, maybe, yeah, okay. So I understand what's going on now. So it still has to go.
Right. I think there is a place where it's using labels to restrict which namespace resources it's looking at. But that's the one that's like looking at all the stuff in the namespace. And there's a webhook that like looks at everything in the namespaces we monitor, which we could reconfigure. But again, we're talking about kind of fairly significant mutations to the way that HNC is configured, which may or may not still be valid when the next version of HNC rolls. So like, you know, fair bit of testing, and then also total incompatibility with anything else anybody wanted to use HNC for. So I guess if I felt like this was going to be a hard change for us to just implement, it would be one thing, but it feels like actually maintaining HNC is going to continue to be significant effort.
Do we feel it's going to be a lot easier? Like, do we feel our implementation is going to be a very strict subset of what HNC does, and thus is going to be a very simple? Or like, because if I think of what we're doing or what we're planning to do versus what HNC does, I think there is lots of overlap. So my concern is like, are we going to re-implement pretty much HNC? Which is, I mean, is kind of, it could be a solution to the HNC dependency, but at that point, it's a complete make or buy thing, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to remove this dependency by literally rewriting it, right? And the cost should be assumed to be high, just as high as it was for the HNC team, which is a dedicated team of, I don't know how many people, right? So like, I think it makes sense to do this if we believe this is a strict subset, like a very strict subset of what HNC does, which could be the case. And maybe it is, but like our CF space and CF org resources look a lot like the HNC ones. And like the core behavior seems to be pretty much it. Like, I guess our thing is going to be a lot less configurable. So that surface is definitely a lot tinier. But like my concern is that if this is 80% of the code that is already in HNC, I'd still buy instead of making, if you see what I mean. Even if it's a pain, like I understand, I buy all the arguments about it being a pain. It's just, I don't know how much, we would have to decide if that pain is so big that it's worth literally rewriting the thing or rewriting 80% of the thing, yeah. Because then we could argue, I don't know, why don't we do the same for Concur or whatever, like our other dependency, Contour, sorry. The other dependencies, like, yeah, they are a pain to maintain, but like they save us work. So yeah, I don't know, I guess the core point is how much do we estimate is this thing gonna be smaller than the real thing, like, and we should also, another point, I think in favor of this is that in that, comparison, we should not just include the size of HNC, but the size of HNC plus all the workarounds we have to put in to make HNC, you know, work for us, which are not part of HNC itself, but are things that would go away if we discard it, right? And I don't know how easy it is to evaluate that. I know you've done spiking, so like, that's, I guess, the best thing we have to kind of predict the future in a way. So it's like, if you're like, oh yeah, I have a spike that is 50 lines and is pretty much doing the job, is untested and everything, but it does the job, then I guess I can buy it. I don't know.
I think that's kind of where we are, right? I mean, so the spike is not complete. It only does the propagation on creation, not the monitoring and propagation of new roles and whatnot. So, and it doesn't have the finalizer, but I think those last two pieces are not going to be a ton of code. So, you know, it sort of feels like, well, I haven't looked at the number of lines of code in HNC, but
yeah, because it's either very
like
tiny
kind of
and we don't know, and then it's not worth having it as a third party, or it's big for reasons that we don't understand, basically, like for things that we don't use, at least, right? Yeah,
and I guess maybe where this possibly could turn into more work is as we like round out the total set of roles that we're going to support. I don't know if there are complexities that we haven't really considered.
Right, but we could argue that if those are specific to our domain, then we would have to do something anyway.
Right.
Like HNC doesn't have domain specific stuff in it for us. So if there are changes that will be needed because they are domain specific, then those, I mean, we can't save on those. Those are, we'll have to do them anyway if they are specific to our roles, for example. Yeah, I mean, if we have the spikes and we believe that, like if I have to choose between this dependency and having like even I don't know 50 lines, 80 lines controller, I buy the controller every day, just because like I agree that 80 lines of our own code versus having a dependency that we have to track, plus the configuration, plus the risks of conflicting with existing stuff. That's kind of, I think it's worth it. But if these are the premises, and I mean, you know, because you've spiked, I don't. So
yeah, I don't. It was Dave and Costa doing the spike. Is that true, Dave?
Yeah, it was Costa and myself.
And it looks pretty straightforward.
I mean, but like you say, we've covered what we think is the 80% low-hanging fruit, the obvious things that we know about. It's the last 20% that we haven't looked at. Things like watching resources so that when new role bindings appear, we replicate them so that new admin users have permissions in all the appropriate namespaces and that kind of thing, that we think to be relatively straightforward, and we've done things like that in the past. But that's where the gotchas could be. And it's also the things that we're not even thinking about. You know, we've looked at K8s roles, K8s role bindings, just the image registry credential secret. That was the only one that wasn't a service account token that needed propagating. So that's the only secret that we're propagating. And then we already had the service account creation in the API, and I think that's been moved into the controllers now. Like Kieran said, as of 1.24, that won't be a problem because it's not creating the K8s won't create the tokens automatically. But we'll still have to make sure that we create the service account and the token, and so there's still work to be done there outside of HNC either way. But yeah, there is the unknown of, is there anything else that needs replicating that we didn't think of?
that's the thing. Like I'm terrified that like we take it out and then suddenly some things start breaking and we don't understand why. And it's just because there is this behavior we've been always relying on that we never really realized we relied on. But I don't think it's a huge risk. I mean, we kind of know how the thing works and what it does and why, you know, which things are relying on. So I think it's a small risk.
Yeah, we got to the point, the code on the branch that's on the exploration story, you can CF push. So we know that the basic functionality is working. We didn't run the entire test suite.
Yeah, because there's probably, I don't know, edge cases in, you know, creating something, then adding a binding, then changing your mind, deleting the binding. Yeah, who knows? Like, there's probably a sequence of operations that breaks it. But yeah, I think we can be pretty confident that like it's clear to us what HNC is doing for us and how we are leveraging it, and there shouldn't be any huge surprises.
I know HNC introduces a few data structures to manage the whole tree thing as well, doesn't it? To try and do that efficiently. I'm not sure if it does manage to do it efficiently, but we will need to think about, you know, quite a few orgs and quite a few spaces and making sure we efficiently check all that.
But we have the advantage that our tree is strictly depth 2. Like they are literally supporting any structure. So if they support any sort of unwildly like tree, they support it. Our one is like fixed every, like, yeah, you can have empty orgs, I guess, but like it's a very flat, very regular tree. So that should maybe save us some headaches. Like we don't need this very super flexible stuff.
You don't have to worry about cycles in your tree or anything.
It's not a tree if it has cycles, so that's granted. Yeah, no, it should make it easier. we shouldn't have that's where we save compared to them. Like they're literally supporting the generic use case. You can have like a depth, like a hierarchy of depth 50 if you want. They'll support it. And maybe also the reconciling cycle takes that into account, right? They need to be able to, I don't know, if you add something at depth 25, it has to replicate it all the way down to depth 50, if you see what I mean. Like it's kind of another, if you think about solving that problem for a second, it's kind of another a completely different thing from ours. We were like, okay, it's in the org, just put it in all spaces of the org. Boom. So yeah, maybe that's where we save most of our complexity.
Yeah, it also has a lot of complexity around watching all the child resources it's made and making sure they don't diverge from anything in the parent. And since we have like a stricter subset of stuff that we actually care about, and we're actively like preventing people from changing those with RBAC and stuff, I think it's simpler there as well.
And we don't care about namespaces being created outside of, like, if you create a CF space, then we reconcile it into a namespace, but we never do things the other way around, right? They don't either, probably. Maybe that's more of a problem for them, because like once you have HNC installed, like kind of every namespace is hierarchical in a way. So they also have to act on existing stuff to make sure they can deal with it somehow. Like, and that's another thing we don't care about. Like if you create a namespace on the side of CF, we won't touch it and it's yours, and you'll never be able to push into it, I guess, for now, and that's it. It's just not ours, we ignore it.
Right. And that's what we want for sure. And to be honest, you could also think of this could make it more flexible, where perhaps you could make a namespace outside of it and like later adopt it by a CF space resource or something. Like I think it opens up some potential there as well. That's just like some pie in the sky thing, but you could imagine like a like bring your own namespace. I don't know.
Yeah. So this would also probably, no, I mean, I was thinking of simplification of endpoints, but that comes with the custom resources regardless of HNC, right? Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of that might be helped by this is I think in the future we're going to want more fine-grained control over the various secrets and stuff that are propagated, because like right now you put your registry credentials in the root namespace and it's sent all the way down, but like for certain multi-tenancy like concerns, you probably don't want dev in space A to be able to see the same push-pull secrets as dev in space B, right? So like this would give us more power over actually like letting operators set those like on an org or space level and actually do it better. Like I'm not saying you couldn't do that with HNC, but I think as we go forward, our use case for copying everything is going to be actually less than it is now.
I think HNC does it the wrong way around. It's like it propagates everything and you have to turn stuff off. So it's a lot easier if you turn stuff on.
Yeah. I think ours is more the case. There's a select few things we actually do want copied versus what you just described.
Yeah, that propagation from root is kind of a thing that we have to actively, for example, replicate, right? It's kind of natural in HNC to be like, okay, wherever you put it, it propagates to all children. Now we'll have to explicitly say we don't just have propagation from org to spaces, but also from root to orgs to spaces potentially, if we want to do it that way. But maybe we don't even need it. I don't know. It kind of opens opportunities. That is true for like solving things just differently.
So I guess I'm kind of feeling like maybe the next step is just write some stories and give it a try. Because I think right now we just have the possibility of some pitfalls.
Yeah, I mean, if you think this kind of feels, just go on and do it. Yeah.
Right. I think this kind of reminds me of the authentication epoch, right? Like where we didn't really learn that it wasn't going to work until we tried to do it.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, I think maybe that's the next step. We'll see, and I think it should come clear pretty quickly if it turns out that, you know, there's complexity we didn't take into account.
We'll certainly have a better picture at that point. And I think earlier on, the cost benefit is a bit different than later. The opportunity cost right now is not that large. It's a bit of work to explore it. If it ends up being difficult or problematic for other ways, then it's not that much time that's been used on that, and we'll have a bit of a more solid answer without totally committing to it. So yeah, I think that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Wayne put a question in the chat before we close out this issue for now. If HNC has solved in the general, then we can take ideas from their solution to solve this in the specific 2-level CF case. I guess that wasn't a question, that was a statement. Yeah, so I think that is pretty much what we're aiming at, that we, instead of using this sort of generalized large tool, we try to get more of a scalpel. So yeah, cool. Any final comments on this topic before we move along to the next one? And feel free to sort of bring this up in the Slack channel, the K8s Korifi dev channel, because, you know, we'll be working on this going forward, and we'd love to sort of find out if anyone discovers any pitfalls or little nuggets of wisdom. Cool. Alrighty then. Next topic is about logging formats and opinions on that.
Yeah, I was just starting to unpack an epoch about logging and observability, and doing some initial poking at the logs, and we have logs coming from Lavrini, coming from our controllers, our API shim, and as it stands today, our logs are a celebration of diversity. They are every possible time format, every possible log format. Some of them are JSON. We've got some sort of Bosch format looking logs in there. We've got stack traces. You have all the things. So, so I think the next step is to make a proposal about a format. And I thought I would just kind of toss it out there to see if anybody has any strong opinions about what that format should be.
I've got a couple of strong opinions that what I don't like in Korifi. So the dev mode of the logging is supposed to make things easier to read. I can read the JSON easier, I think. Anyway, that's an aside because we can just switch that easily. Errors, that's it. So if a user like isn't authenticated to do something, we shouldn't be logging that as an error level. That's the thing that's generating a stack trace. That's just a user error. We can log it and say user wasn't auth. If our application gets stuck and we need to go and print out an error, that's the case for an error. But I think I've been through all the errors in the logs and I didn't see any which were warning that our app was broken. It was all just the user's done something wrong, really. So that would be nice to switch. Oh yeah, and the dev mode thing. The dev mode makes the logs turn timestamps into like scientific notation numbers, which are absolutely unreadable.
Yeah, that's yeah, I noticed those. Those are that's like
because they're Unix timestamps, and then they get committed.
Yeah, it's an epoch rendered in scientific notation.
Oh man,
it's kind of strangely delightful for me in a perverse sort of way. Like, why not?
Yeah, I guess so.
I linked the like RFC or whatever that all the other CF components have used. I know Eric feels very passionate about it as well. So I feel like we should probably just use that for the timestamp.
Don't we Shouldn't the format of the timestamp be configurable? I remember that there were certain options for CF on VMs.
Hmm.
I think it was
So-
I think we began with timestamps, and then people were like, you know, they're terrible. Like every time we debug, we have to copy and paste this thing all over the place to convert it. So I think we started moving towards like human readable timestamps, but the thing was configurable because people wanted to maintain backwards compatibility, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can just start with readable timestamps, like
Mhm.
some RFC format. But like in terms of like general format of the logs, I think CF has a tradition of JSON logs because then you can like treat them automatically in a way that your machines can
Mhm.
digest them, and you can. So I think we've been pioneering that thing. So maybe it would be nice to do that. I don't know. I mean, there is a lot. CF has its own library to do this. What's its name?
Logger.
Lager, which is not
Oh.
bad at all. I actually liked it, but I think nowadays there is like more trendy libraries that do this as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's the big choice. Like, do we want to do just line oriented, or I mean, it's always line oriented, I think. But like, do we want to just print JSON, or do? Because I think CF's philosophy was we always print JSON, and then if you want to read it nicely, there is a tool that will do it. Because in the end, if you think about it, you can always go from, you know, well-structured data to any format that you like for reading, but you can't go back. If you print something that is nice to read, then it's a pain to parse. If you want to do anything automatically, like, I don't know, you know, monitor them or something like that, it's just much harder. So maybe we should go with that. That feels like a good idea. I don't know what the tendencies are in the larger like cloud native community.
I think
There is a logging format that the Kubernetes community follows. There's also been some internal discussion of this at VMware, and at least some larger subset of components there have settled on a variation of that. That's basically like take the fields in that Kubernetes JSON log format, but use the human readable timestamp instead of epoch. I guess we asked them about that, and they're like, I don't know, nobody really. It wasn't a strong opinion that they had, and so we came in with my strong opinion.
So the Kubernetes components log in JSON, like the kubelet and all those, the Kubernetes API.
I think there is some amount of configurability there too. I might have to dig up the links.
I
for
think
that.
that's the direction they're trending in. Was the impression I got when I doing just a tiny bit of googling.
This is another one of those things where like we definitely led the way, and there are copycats. But yeah, good. We should do it then. We should do JSON.
Okay. Well, this is all good.
Doesn't
These
the
were all the opinions I was hoping to hear.
Isn't there's that Uber library, like the Uber login library? Doesn't that do JSON?
Yeah, Zap. Yeah, that'll do JSON fairly efficiently.
Maybe I don't know which ones we're using at the moment.
Use Zap in
Apparently,
places, but
Yeah.
multiple different kinds. Yeah.
Because in Go we have the equivalent of log4j, like someone has tried to come up with like a generic logging interface, and then there are implementations. Like we went all like full-blown Java there, didn't we? Like how is it called? Maybe that's what we should use. Yeah, it's called Logger. So LOGR, and it's like an interface, and then it has implementations.
Right, and
I
there's
don't know
a
though.
specific implementation that.
But they don't support levels, I guess. They don't support logging levels because
no,
because Dev Cheney once said they're not good, and everyone just followed.
So they support V instead. You can put a number.
Of course. Okay, so we went from 3 to infinite. Perfect.
You should really stop at 10, I guess. That's what I've heard anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so Zapper is the adapter of Zap for Logger. Yeah, maybe we could do that just in case we want to. But this is an implementation detail. So. What we care about, I guess in the proposal we should just say they should look like this. And
I'll try and come up with what sounds like a not very controversial proposal, which is probably just going to be mostly a copy paste from the VMware proposal. But
Yeah, I recall I think the Go router switched from the Cloud Foundry logger library to Zap just for efficiency. So logger was not being very efficient about serializing JSON. And I think it also had some locking in there that was slowing down the Go router. So it may not be as much of a performance concern for us, but Zap seems like it's still used pretty widely.
There's also some fun conversation going on in the chat with musing about if we have structured data for logs, you can potentially get that into tooling that we use like K9s. So definitely a fun read there. I definitely agree that structured data logs are convenient because you can always go to human readable, as you mentioned, but the other way becomes tricky at best. So yeah, I think we should just choose something, a structured data format, and choose a date format and just go from there. Because consistency over, well, whatever we have.
it's a party.
Yep.
So consistent and good is the ideal state. Consistently bad is less good. Not sure if that's better than inconsistently good and bad.
Scientific notation everywhere.
There we go. Variable precision. This happened last year, maybe. This 4 months time period.
Definitely, Eric, if you want to explore that, go ahead and put it on a Spike branch and we'll
sure.
promptly forget about it. Cool. Any last thoughts before we move forward a little bit? Looks like another chat message. Yeah, machine readable logs enable folks to make their own choices on how to consume and work with logs. Absolutely. Yep. Cool. All right, we've got about 9 minutes left and 2 topics, relatively lightweight on at least one of them. So we should have plenty of time. So a comment about great backlog cleanup.
Yeah, so I've noticed that we have a lot of in progress epics, but they're not all really in progress. I think there are at least 2 or 3 that have just a couple of stories that we're not actually we don't actually plan to work on. It's just a part of the epic, so I can't close the epic. So what I'm asking you is, if you own an epic which you think is done, go take the stories that you think are never going to be worked on in the near future or whatever, find a new home for those, maybe take the label out, whatever, and then put the epic in done, so that it doesn't look like we're working on 10 epics at the same time, which is not realistic. Because I mean, the orgs one definitely still ongoing. There's a few that are definitely still ongoing, maybe 4 or 5. So we have a lot going on, but not as much as it looks like from the roadmap thing. Also, it's nice to have a few epics in the done, just to show that we actually finish something from time to time. Yeah, just that. In general, like, there's also stories without labels, that kind of stuff. If you own any of those, and you can label them. Just in general, just trying to keep things tidy. I do things this by myself from time to time, but like, if I was not the original creator of the story, it's very hard for me to kind of trace back where it comes from and why, and whether it makes sense, if it needs to go, or if it's something that should be done in the future. I don't know. Like, if you do it for the stories you own, it's much easier.
Cool, definitely makes sense. Anyone that resonates with, please do some cleanup this week, so we can.
I've already bothered people in their DMs, so I think we're good.
I'll try to help wrangle that on the sort of North American side as well. So hopefully we can arrive at some consistency. Awesome. There is another topic, which is the INSTALL.md. There's a pull request. This is about our installation directions not being up to date. And that got wedged in our CI. And I've been trying to poke it in the background. and it managed to go through this time. So I'm gonna go ahead and click that merge button right now. Confirm
Yeah,
my-
yesterday we had that issue with like, we had CI down for a bit because I think changed the domain or something and it wasn't available for a bit. And then we have this problem that we run all tests even if the change is just on README or something. But yeah, if it's now through, yeah, feel free to merge it. I've been going through it. I'm not done yet, but like what I plan to do this week is going through it just to make sure everything is in shape and it works, and then that's it, and then we're done. I guess we are very close to releasing now. There's this chore about the change in the CRD namespace, which I think is being worked on, and we've picked it up today, and we might finish it tomorrow, and then I'm just going to click the button.
Cool. Yeah. So we got that merged, and I'd like to point out that that was a PR we got from someone that had not been on the core team. So always nice to see people taking an interest. Thank you for that on our call. Yeah, keep poking us if things are broken. Cool. We have some items about press releases. Yay, Korifi. Couple links. Looks like TechCrunch and somewhere else if I click through. PR Newswire. So yeah, definitely some things to check out. Definitely an indication that we're getting to that point where we feel like we have something people can look at if we're publicizing it, versus about a month ago where we were kind of hiding a little bit. So definitely cool to see all that. I have not actually read the article yet, so cool. Well then, that looks like about the end of the topics. If there are any things people want to add in at the end, something we missed, anything that is on your mind right now before we break, since it'll be another couple weeks. Alternatively, find us on the Cloud Foundry Slack and Korifi Dev. And thank you everyone for attending. This was great to see new and old faces, and yeah, feels awesome. Last thoughts? All right, then I'll let you all go. Thanks again so much. Bye everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.